Welcome, I'm the Gothic Librarian. Before I begin, I would like to thank your maker and corpse husband for tips on how to make better videos, especially the sound quality. I only have a cheap microphone and I use iMovie for putting the videos together and GarageBand for recording and editing. And actually it just crashed before I could save. And I had already told 2 stories and now I have to start all over. But okay, I still have a lot to learn and a lot of room to improve. But I hope you still enjoy the video. Thank you. Let's begin. Number 5. When I was 8, my parents always went overboard with Halloween decorations. They'd pretend to be scarecrows and then jump out at kids that walked past. We always bought those huge expensive displays that looked so realistic you'd almost call the police because you thought they were actual people. And of course we had fog machines everywhere. I loved it all and quickly Halloween became my favorite holiday. When I was 8 though, we went all out. Gore became the new big thing. I'm not talking about severed heads or a few fingers laying on the ground in a pool of ketchup. It was more along the lines of severed bodies and skeletons with rotten flesh on it. Like I said, we always went all out. My parents were acting a bit strange though, even for that time of the year. Their visits to get more props became more frequent and less lengthy. What they brought back was more realistic than anything I had ever seen before. Eventually, we were hanging parts that smelled horrible and dripped fluids from these huge metal meat hooks. We received a few complaints from the neighbors, but my parents always just snapped, "Get into the Halloween spirit!" at them. My 2 brothers got a bit frightened by this, but I always just assured them, "They're just props, you don't have to worry about them." One of the last props they bought really pushed the limits between fake and reality. Right before I went to bed, my parents said they were going prop shopping again and probably wouldn't be back until the morning. I was tired, so I didn't really question how strange this was. They kissed me goodbye and told me they loved me. I woke up the next morning and got ready to go to school. As I walked outside, I saw the newest addition to our house of horrors. A head was mounted on a pike, soaked in blood, with the eyes removed and the mouth sewed shut. The thick red blood dripped onto the ground, making a large puddle underneath. My parents came up behind me and said, "Don't you love it? We're going to have an even better surprise when you get home from school." I nodded, in fear of what I was going to see upon my return, as my parents' new obsession with ultra-realistic props was starting to frighten me. I asked my friends at school if I could stay at their house, but they all said their parents weren't letting anyone come over. At this point, I pondered whether or not I should just run away. However, life on the streets doesn't really work for an 8-year-old, so I decided to go home. I opened my front door and my house was eerily silent. Since my brothers aren't old enough to go to school yet, my house was usually filled with the noise of them playing. I called out for my parents and they stepped out of the garage. With long smiles, they told me to follow them into the garage for my surprise. It was dark when I stepped in, and as I felt around for the light switch, I bumped into something swaying. I fumbled around a bit more and eventually hit the light switch, and I was greeted to see both of my little brothers hanging in front of me with their tongues cut out. The lights cut out as I heard my parents whisper from behind me, "Don't you love it?" I ran and I screamed as fast as I could through the dark as I heard my parents' footsteps closing in behind me. I made it to the door leading out of the garage before them and slammed it shut. I burst through the front door and ran to my neighbor's house, sobbing. I told him what happened, and the police rushed to my house. My parents were nowhere to be found. As it turns out, the quote-unquote props that my parents were buying weren't props at all. They would hunt isolated individuals, torture them, kill them, then make their bodies into Halloween decorations. While I was at school, they cut out my brother's tongues so they couldn't scream, then kill them by hanging. I was given to a loving foster family, which I now call my real parents. This incident occurred when I was 8, and I'm 25 now. After years of therapy, I was able to block out most of what happened until recently. I opened my front door to go to work, and I found my cat dead and butchered on my doorstep. On its tongue was a note saying, "Don't you love it?" I moved states 3 years ago. Number 4. Halloween is arguably the most favorite time of the year, especially as a kid. At least, this was true for me. I loved being scared, even if it meant spending the next month or two in my parents' bedroom or hiding under my blanket in hopes to escape the witches and ghouls. Maybe my paranoia is what caused a ban on scary movies, stories, and anything of such until my current age. One Halloween, 1995, was the most memorable for myself. This was the year I entered 3rd grade. The year itself was mostly enjoyable because of my teacher, Mr. Jones. He was full of life and spirit, creating new activities every day of school. No one had a bad word to share of him. My school was pretty special compared to others, on terms of allowing us to dress up on Halloween. Many of the staff members also partook on this tradition, Mr. Jones no exception. I had been excited to see his costume, considering the standards he had set for himself the years before. However, looking back, he had only come as a zombie the year before. I don't understand why my standards were so high. This year, he had come as himself, only his body had clearly been done by professional makeup artists. He looked completely mutilated with a knife through his stomach. The strangest thing was no one mentioned how graphic he looked. In fact, everyone seemed gloomy, even if the day had been Halloween. Mr. Jones seemed to ignore them the same way they ignored him. He only talked to me. It constantly bothered me to follow him into the room's closet. He had a special surprise, but, unlike most students, I had a respect for substitutes and sat down as soon as I was yelled at for trying to leave to the closet. This clearly upset Mr. Jones, who simply stormed out of the classroom after his 6th failed attempt to get me to follow him to the closet. He hasn't shown up since. His substitute became permanent. It has only been now that I realize why everyone looks at me insanely when I tell them my story. As I cleaned up the attic to collect anything of use on my college expedition, I noticed a pile of neighborhood newspapers, most in the year 1995. In fact, the last one in the pile was on Halloween of 1995. The top story's headline sent chills to my spine and back, then left me frozen, as if all of my body parts fell asleep. Local teacher found severely mangled and stabbed in home. Number 3. About 4 years ago, we were celebrating Halloween like any other group of friends. We had plenty of beer and had candy for any of the trick-or-treaters that stopped by. The night had a nice scary feel to it, like you would see in a scary movie. There was a full moon that was covered by a small sheet of clouds, and you could just make it out. There were no stars, and the air was cool and damp. My friends and I were taking half-hour-long shift at the door, since we didn't have a doorbell, and the knocking at the door couldn't be heard over the talking and music. I decided to take the first shift to just get it over with. The trick-or-treaters were your average little kids. Superheroes, dinosaurs, princesses, and the sort. I decided to sit outside to get some fresh air while I was on my shift. For a moment, there was absolutely no sound. It was eerily quiet. There were no kids running around in my view, and it seemed nothing was happening. Suddenly, I saw a kid, a little boy, all by himself. He wasn't dressed up, and he was just jogging down the road. I thought it was rather strange that he didn't have a parent with him, but that was none of my concern. A few minutes later, I had run out of my drink and decided to go back inside to get another. As I was coming back to the door, I heard a knock, so I grabbed a bowl of candy and set my drink down. I opened the door, and nobody was there. I looked around and saw no one out there, so I figured it must have been some little brat teenagers. I wanted to catch them, so I stayed at the door and looked out of the peephole. On the right side of my vision, I saw that same kid, the one that was all alone, walking up to my door. I opened the door with the candy bowl out and expected to hear him yell, "Trick or treat!" I opened the door and suddenly the kid was gone. I was shocked, but the beer kept me from thinking anything was wrong. I stepped outside to finish the last 10 minutes of my shift and sat down. The air outside had gotten considerably colder from before. It was October though, so I paid it no mind. Again, it was early in the night, and I seemed to be the only person outside. I walked over to the road and looked down and back, hoping I would see at least someone. I did see someone. Under the only street light on the road was that kid. He was sitting there, all alone. His head was in his hands, and I could swear I heard some whimpering. I began to walk over to him. "Little boy," I called out. "Little boy, what's wrong? Are you okay? Where are your parents?" I got no response. He acted as if I wasn't even there. "Little boy, hello? Are you hurt?" Still no response. I decided to walk closer to him. As I got within 10 feet of him, he looked at me from the side. His eyes, oh God, his eyes were a burning red, and his cheeks seemed to be cracked. I backed away a couple of feet and looked around. I figured this had to be a joke. I looked for a wire or something. He had to be a toy. Suddenly, he was standing. His head tilted somewhat down and to the side. He was staring at me. No, not at me. Through me. His mouth opened slightly, and I leaned in a bit. I was hoping he would say something. He screamed, a piercing scream, a scream so loud it knocked me off my feet. I closed my eyes as tightly as I could and wrapped my hands over my ears, but that didn't help at all. All I could hear was this piercing scream. I sat there on the ground, my ears ringing and my whole body shaking. I sat there for what felt like months. I finally opened my eyes, and nothing was there. I looked around for the Hellboy, but to no avail. The sky had changed. The stars were out. The moon was only a crescent. I stood up, still with my hands around my ears. All I could hear was that ringing. I managed to get back to my house, and I went in. Number 2. I used to own a small Halloween-themed shop. It's located downtown in a fairly small city, and unlike many businesses in town after Walmart's arrival, my store never really suffered when it came to customers. Of course, it was only open for the month of October. I sold a lot of unique things you might find at other novelty stores in bigger cities, but for cheaper prices. I really didn't do it for profit, as much as I did it to celebrate the spooky Halloween spirit. I also love to celebrate that spirit by doing my best to scare the crap out of people every Halloween. One particular Halloween, my chosen victim was my buddy Alex. He was a pretty relaxed and calm guy most of the time, so he was the perfect person for the plan I had in mind. First, you should know that I always began packing up my store every Halloween fairly early in the morning, as it was unlikely to get customers on the holiday itself. I told Alex that I had much heavier merchandise that year and could use help moving it all out. Not knowing what he was getting into, he accepted, and I told him to meet me at the shop at 10 at night, sharp. As I said, Alex was a relaxed and calm guy most of the time. Unfortunately for him, he had once told me about his irrational fear of clowns and how he could not function around them. So naturally, my plan involved dressing up in a clown costume. When he arrived at the shop, I would stand perfectly still like a statue. Once he realized he couldn't find me, he would then call me, most likely. But when my phone rang, it would be in the pocket of an apparent clown statue, and when he came over to investigate, I'd give him my best scare. Pretty simple plan, right? Everything was set in motion. I dressed up, stood near the back of the store, obscured by some boxes and other decorations, and waited for his arrival. A little after 10, Alex entered. It was very dark, as I'd made the last-minute decision to cut the lights before he arrived. He called my name a few times, but of course I didn't respond. I heard him walking around a bit, looking around the shop for me. I could barely hold back laughter. After a bit more shuffling, I heard Alex speak in a defensive tone. "Not funny, dude." I looked around, but there was definitely no way he could see me right now, even if I had twitched or anything. I continued to play dumb. "Come on, man!" he repeated again, sounding angrier this time. "That's not funny!" Confused, I quietly adjusted a nearby stack of boxes so I could peer through a crack toward his voice. I couldn't make out his shape very well, but I knew for sure he was not looking in my direction. Suddenly, my phone rang. I heard Alex turn toward the sound instantly, and I froze, giddy with excitement that the plan might be working. But as he approached, I realized he wasn't holding his phone, and a wave of disappointment fell over me as I discovered my prank had been ruined by another caller. "Alright, fine, you got me," I announced shortly after the phone stopped ringing, taking off my mask and stepping out into the open. But Alex's face didn't look relieved. His face twisted in such horror that I had never seen before. He began yelling and spouting panicky words, and I spent a few minutes trying to get him to calm down. He explained to me that when he entered, a man in a clown costume had stared at him and began walking slowly towards him. But when my phone rang, the man had dashed right out of the store. Alex had no idea that I was actually hiding in the back the whole time. I don't want to think about what would have happened if Alex had showed up late at night, or if my other buddy had never called during the prank. Number 1. For as long as I can remember, the whole 15 years of my life, my sister and I would dress up on Halloween, go across town to my grandparents' house, and trick-or-treat in their neighborhood. My grandparents are not very old, in their mid-60s, but many people who live around them are. This includes the woman who lives across the street. Well, she lived across the street. A few years ago, her elderly husband passed away. She followed suit about a year later, but she died of breast cancer. My sister was very close to this woman. Let's call her Jane. and thought of her almost as a second grandmother. Anyway, every year we would go visit her on Halloween, as she got very lonely sometimes. Jane always gave out apples instead of candy. As a young child, this bothered me greatly, but my sister loved it. When Jane passed away one spring a few years back, my sister was devastated. That year on Halloween, we realized we would receive no apples. We trick-or-treated as usual. Our neighborhood and my grandparents attended the Halloween parade, etc. It was a normal Halloween, until the next morning when we arrived at my grandparents' house to spend the day with them. On the front stoop, centered and pristine, were 2 red apples. So, what about this last story? Spooky but with a touch of sweetness, just like Halloween. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a thumb up and a comment if you like. And it will really mean a lot to me if you subscribe to my channel. So, what are your plans for this Halloween? I would recommend a clown costume. Come back to visit me here at the Gothic Library for my next reading.